Welcome to the Rustic Garden. Today I want to talk to you about staking your tomato plants, and I'm just going to show you how I do it. Again, I kind of create as I go along, so you don't have to follow my exact way, but the principles are pretty much the same. I want to show you over here is a delicious variety tomato. It's been pruned out to a stem, actually two stems, and I tied it right to a bamboo post. And that post is good enough, the pole is good enough to support the initial growth of the tomato plant, but it's not going to be strong enough to manage a full-sized plant. Over here you can see the post is in the ground, but I never tied the tomato plant to it. And this is what a tomato would look like if you did not stake it. It would just fall to the ground and it would start sprawling all over, which is fine. You can do that. You're going to get tomatoes, but the reason you stake a tomato is to really reduce the chances of it getting diseases, fungus, insect attacks, and it's just a lot easier to manage. So that tomato will be tied up to that stake. Over here I started with a tomato cage, and that tomato cage was good enough to really work with, let's see what variety that is. That is my Homestead, with my Homestead tomato until it got to the top. And then I put in my biggest pole that I use, which I purchased at Home Depot. These are about 8-foot poles, and they only cost $2.97. And what I do is I just cut a point into the tip, and that's the main pole that I use to support full growth of a tomato. But in this case I start either with a small post or bamboo stake or a stick, just like that, tie the tomato up as I did with the delicious variety there. In this case over here I used a cage, and then I added a bigger pole, and they just work together. And over here in my bigger bed you can see I did all three. There is a smaller cage there, a small post, and then I put in the large stake, and that stake will take care of the rest of the growth for the summer. And I put them in at different stages. When I do put in the bigger post, I just tie the smaller bamboo stake right to the larger post. I will prune this over the season, but that will be enough support for that tomato to grow all summer long. And again, you don't have to do it exactly the way that I do it, but you want to start with something small to make sure you keep your tomato off the ground. You don't want it to really sprawl all over them. The tomatoes have been staked up and pruned out, and this is just the change. Over here I added the large 8-foot post, and like I said earlier, I just tie the starting post right to the bigger post and do some quick ties, very loose circle right there. You can see you don't want to tie it so tight you strangle your plant, but that's another tie to the smaller post and then another tie to the bigger post, and I'll just take care of that as a double stem. And I'm actually growing this tomato in a way that I'm trying to get record-sized tomatoes for myself, and I'll talk more about that in another video. Here's the tomato that was sprawling on the ground. I actually changed out to the post to a bigger one, and just loosely again tied up the three main stems, and that will straighten out over time. They're just curled up because they were laying on the ground. I thinned out the center of the Homestead. One of the things you want to do with ongoing pruning is to really remove the leaves that compact right in the center there. That's to let air flow in. You want to leave enough leaves so that they're covering over the tomatoes so your tomatoes don't get sun scald. But I pulled up those branches. You can see I tied them right to the cage, and as they get taller, this is actually a semi-determinate variety, so it's not going to get too much taller. I'll tie them up to here. But when you're pulling in your production stems to the center in here again is really going to fill up with leaves, but I've pruned out some. You can see a notch that I took out of there. So you just take out enough to let airflow in, and what that does is, again, the airflow comes in, obviously, dries the plant leaves, and you have less chance for fungus and disease. The final plant is this one. This is a basically 3-stem production there, and then I let it go to 6 stems. I did a video on that. But I did the same thing, cut out the suckers because I don't want them growing anymore. But I loosely tied, you can see all the ties, nothing fancy, just pulled the main stems closer to the post. That will keep them from mixing with the tomatoes over there, lets airflow come in through there. And again, I took out leaves that were in the middle. Here's a stem right there that I cut out. Here's a stem right there that I cut out. And you want to just remove the center leaves over time, gradually, so that the airflow is better through your plant. Again, nothing fancy, just a general principle for pruning that I use. And you can see the tomatoes are doing pretty well, even after that hot spell I had last week. I have to really go through all 40 of my plants and tie them up again. Hope you enjoyed the video. Please check out my blog at www.therustedgarden.blogspot.com and also check out my YouTube videos. Thanks.